The lecture hall was silent, the kind of silence that carries weight. A young John Kennedy, ambitious, sharp-eyed, and determined, stood before his professor, clutching a stack of papers he had poured his soul into. He thought he had nailed it. Yet, when the grades came back, his heart sank. A bold red C stared back at him, carved into the paper like a scar. "Mr. Kennedy," Professor Margaret Caldwell said sternly, peering at him over her wire-rimmed glasses, "you are clever, but cleverness without discipline is wasted. Your arguments lack structure. Your passion is clear, but passion alone will not carry you through life." For a moment, Kennedy felt small, like a boy caught daydreaming in class. The rejection stung deeper than the grade itself. Others whispered around him, amused that the bold young man who always spoke with such confidence had been humbled. But Kennedy, who would later become known for his wit and grit, never forgot that moment. The professor who rejected him disappeared into the shadows of academia, while Kennedy went on to rise in politics, shaping policy and earning a national stage. Yet the story doesn't end there, because decades later, someone asked the inevitable question, whatever happened to the professor who once rejected John Kennedy? Margaret Caldwell had never intended to leave a mark on history. She was the daughter of a coal miner from West Virginia, a woman who had fought tooth and nail for every scrap of education she ever earned. In the 1950s, when women professors were scarce, she earned her doctorate in political science, not by luck but through relentless hard work. She believed in discipline above all things. To her, every student, and no matter their background, was capable of greatness, but only if they committed to the grind. When she graded Kennedy's paper, it wasn't malice. She saw potential, but potential without refinement. What he needed, she thought, was humility. She wanted him to learn that ambition meant nothing without the patience to master the details. But while Kennedy went on to a celebrated public career, Caldwell's own path was filled with struggles unseen. She was passed over for promotions that went to less qualified men. Her sharpness, her unyielding standards, often made her the unpopular one in faculty meetings. Too rigid, they called her. Too demanding. Yet she pressed on, pouring her energy into her students. Some went on to teach, others became lawyers, and many wrote back years later thanking her for instilling in them the discipline to succeed. Still, the world never remembered her name. Not until one day, much later. It was a chance encounter that brought her story back into light. Kennedy, by then well known for his wit and his speeches, gave a talk at the university decades after that C on his paper. During AQA, a student asked, "Senator Kennedy, what's the toughest rejection you've ever faced?" Kennedy chuckled, pausing for effect, and then leaned into the microphone. "I once wrote what I thought was the greatest political essay of my life, only to have Professor Caldwell hand me back a paper with a big red AC. I'll never forget her words, 'Cleverness without discipline is wasted.' At the time, I was furious, but looking back, she may have taught me the most important lesson of my career." The audience laughed, but the words stuck. For the first time in years, Margaret Caldwell's name was spoken publicly, and not in ridicule, but in gratitude. By then, Margaret was living in a quiet retirement home near the Blue Ridge Mountains. Her health was failing, her steps slower, her voice softer, but her mind was still sharp. A former student, now a journalist, heard Kennedy's mention and decided to track her down. When he found her, she was sitting by a window with a book on her lap, watching the sunset. "Professor Caldwell?" he asked gently. She looked up, amused. "Haven't been called that in a while. Most here just call me Margaret." The journalist told her how Kennedy had spoken of her, how he credited her with teaching him discipline. For a moment, her eyes welled with tears, the kind she hadn't allowed herself to shed in years. She had spent decades wondering if she had been too harsh, if her unyielding standards had pushed away more than they built up. To know that one of her toughest students had carried her words with humor, it felt like redemption. In her final years, Margaret Caldwell became something of a local legend. Students from the nearby college visited her, curious to meet the professor who once rejected John Kennedy. They found not a bitter old woman but a teacher still eager to give advice. She told them, Don't chase easy praise. Praise will vanish, but discipline will carry you through storms. When she passed away, quietly and peacefully, her story might have ended there. But Kennedy himself, when asked again about his influences, repeated her name. And so, the professor who once rejected him became immortalized not for her titles, not for her accolades, but for the lessons she gave a young man who would never forget her. The message is clear: we all crave recognition, but the greatest impact often comes from moments we don't even realize are shaping history. Margaret Caldwell never sought fame, yet her insistence on discipline left a mark on someone who carried her lesson into the halls of power. And so, the professor who once rejected John Kennedy is not forgotten. She lives on in the quiet power of her words, the words that remind us that rejection isn't the end, but often the beginning of greatness.